A good day to all of you. I am Mansraj Ramphal from Trinidad and Tobago. This is my second Fiji conference. I was there in 2019. My topic is Despotism Tempered by Sugar, the first-hand account of Joseph Beaumont, Chief Justice of British Guiana, of the oppression and hardships suffered by Indian indentured laborers. Despotism tempered by sugar. In 1871, Joseph Beaumont published A New Slavery, his book on the immigrant experience in British Guiana. He had held the office of Chief Justice of British Guiana from 1863 to 1868. So he was in charge of the administration of the legal system throughout Guyana, and he certainly knew what he was talking about, what he was writing about. He therefore had extensive opportunities of becoming acquainted with the position and the condition of the Indian and the Chinese migrants. Beaumont wrote that the political system of Demerara, early name for British Guiana, was divined and defined by Anthony Trollope as a despotism tempered by sugar. He added that it was absolutely despotic. The general legislative power is almost equally shared by the planters' nominees in the court of policy, while the power of the purse strings is wholly in the control of their nominees in the combined court. These would be the legislative and the executive arms of the government. And Trollope is well remembered for his famous recording of the statement by a Guyanese planter who said, "Give me my heart's desire of coolies, and we will supply the world with sugar." At that time, Demerara sugar was known throughout the world, and Demerara, British Guiana, was supplying England with more than half of her refined sugar. A New Slavery. 103 years before Hugh Tinker, Beaumont described indenture as a new slavery which was rooted in slavery and grown in its stale soil. Throughout his book, The New Slavery, Beaumont was guided by the principles of English justice and fairness. He would have learned much from his father, the Reverend John Beaumont, an itinerant British preacher among the Wesleyan Methodists and a foremost abolitionist. He interpreted the behavior of the plantocracy as a result of their having become corrupt, or as their blindness, a blindness born from ignorance. Beaumont condemned the planters' behavior and concluded that the system does a serious injury, not only to the immigrants, but to the community at large, a community that was economically dependent on sugar. Beaumont was fully aware of the unfair and oppressive legal and political structures because he participated in both, and the social and political condition of British Guiana was by far its most remarkable feature. Its system of government was not only that of a complete and highly organized oligarchy, but a mercantile oligarchy, an irresponsible oligarchy founded on the traditions of slavery, and no different from the rest of the British West Indies. A New Slavery continued. Devu, a former stipendiary magistrate, had also reported on the very widespread discontent in Guyana and the dissatisfaction existing throughout the immigration population, both Indians and Chinese. The serious disturbances on plantation Leonora in 1869, the first of a major series of serious disturbances, informed Despotism's famous letter to the Secretary of State for the Colonies, Lord Granville. Despotism saw the need for remedial measures to avoid far more serious calamities. And those calamities will come in many more strikes called riots, called disturbances, but they were just strikes for more bread, for more roti, right? For more pay, because the guys were starving in Guyana, as we'll see later. And a royal commission was appointed to investigate as a result of this long letter. A sacred cow. To the planters, however, the immigration system was as sacred as the old system of slavery. That is where they made their living and their exorbitant profits. Already, Guyana had received some 90,000 Indian migrants. But Beaumont was hopeful that this system of oppression, which is in truth a new slavery under another guise, will be brought to an end. He had observed firsthand the oppression and the hardships suffered by the migrants, and he called for reform, without which he too, like Despotism and others, expected very serious disorders which would follow. Beaumont lived on the plantation complex and had very frequent personal communication with immigrants, apart from trying cases in the courts of Guyana, in which he was very experienced, and he became Chief Justice. So he knew what he was saying about the conditions of the immigrants. He habitually observed their pursuits and their habits. He saw them at work on the estates and also in their own ranges, barracks or houses, and in their relaxations, which were very few. The only major holiday, in fact, was the Huse, Muharram, or Gadzi, as it's called in Mauritius. He observed their movements about the country. The evil indenture system. Beaumont pointed out that, and this is a long quote, the essential and central point from which many of the evils and dangers of the existing system arise, and on which they turn, is the artificial system of indenture or engagement, under which migrants are introduced, and their subjection during the 5 years or more of service to a code of law, which in Beaumont's opinion was unnecessary, arbitrary, and in many particulars unjust and oppressive. Also, as we very well know, throughout the diaspora, several immigrants, that should be rather many immigrants, had been hoodwinked in India by the promise of higher wages in Guyana. And additionally, there were the cases of kidnapping, and particularly kidnapping of women and young children, and forcibly containing persons who were then shipped to the colonies against their will. These matters even reached the newspapers in India. The evil labor law system continued. So Beaumont found serious evils inherent in the system of labor law, which was exceedingly stringent and galling and liable to great abuse in its administration. As I said before, he was the man in charge of the legal administration, so he knew best. Among the gravest injustices was the draconian labor laws. Misdemeanours, many of them minor misdemeanours, absence from work, speaking back to the supervisor, and so on, subjected the immigrant to penal and criminal proceedings. These penal prison provisions fell upon the immigrants with terrible and crushing severity. The partial and oppressive administration of justice adverted to the extraordinary number of prosecutions under them, heavy penalties and harsh and cruel sentences. Every neglect or breach of duty by the immigrant was made subject to heavy penalties under various sections of Part 12 of the Immigration Ordinance, and the fines varying from $24 to $48 and possible imprisonment. Magistrates habitually impose severe and often harsh and even cruel sentences. Where they could not or do not imprison directly, they imposed fines which were commonly beyond the means of the convicted person on their very measly wages. These fines normally range from $2, which was 2 average weeks' pay, to $5 and $10. During the 5-year period ending June 1870, 32,876 charges were brought against immigrants. Jail for labor offenses. Chief Justice Beaumont was repeatedly distressed to see the jails in Georgetown and New Amsterdam, the capital city and the next largest city, so crowded with immigrants who constituted the vast majority of prisoners. Of these, by far the greater number were sentenced for breaches of the labor laws, 4,936 commitments within 1 year to the jail. 3,148 were persons born in India or China, and 2,111 were committed for offenses against these draconian labor laws, which existed throughout the West Indies. The extraordinary number of deaths, another characteristic of indenture and migration. Beaumont observed the extraordinary number of deaths amongst the immigrants on plantations and the shocking spectacles which he saw amongst them in the jail hospital. He added that, long quote again, "The waste of life amongst them is so excessive as of itself, and apart from its aggravating causes, to constitute a most flagrant disgrace to the system of immigration, and in fact, to involve the reproduction of one of the most shocking features of West Indian slavery, the certain dying out of a race of people." This is the Indian people and the Chinese people, in a false and subject industrial and social condition. This is not a passing sojourner. This is Beaumont, the Chief Justice of Guyana. During 1864 to 1868, the deaths among the indentured immigrants range from 1,200 to 1,300 per annum, excessively high rates. It was impossible to ascertain deaths which had taken place in the hospitals on the estates. Indeed, in some hospitals in Guyana and Grenada and the islands, sick immigrants were thrown out on the streets to go and beg, and as they describe it, to wander, and as I will describe it, to die. Unnecessarily high death rates. Beaumont added that the mortality statistics were inaccurate, uncertain, or confused, or partial. So statistics were not really forthcoming. And those many deaths, excessive deaths, remain unnumbered, uncounted. He mentioned the extraordinary number who sicken and die from such causes as anemia, dropsy, chronic ulcers, and these spoke forcibly of the neglect, the exposure, and the starvation from which they suffered. Again, a British West Indian experience under indenture. Additionally, there were numerous cases of remittent and intermittent fever and diseases of the respiratory organs. Many died within the first 2 years of indenture, called the seasoning period, when they were supposed, right, to take it slowly and move into the work gradually. But in many cases, within 3 days of arrival in Guyana, that hostile epidemic environment, they were out in the fields and the sun, burning, working, sweating, and dying. His observation over the years in the colony only tended to confirm the painful impression as to the too common neglect, disregard, and sacrifice of the health and indeed the lives of the indentured people. Other troubling features, and I summarize them here, they include the extreme poverty of the people and their too frequent debility and sickness, the inadequate hospital accommodation, the general ignorance, meaning a lack of knowledge about the whole environment of the migrants, their special ignorance of the English language and of English habits and ideas, but somebody needed to teach them that. Their remote and alien origin from 11,000 sea miles away, and separation from their own country and the change required of them. Their social isolation and restriction from almost every amenity of life, particularly leisure, cultural, and other social activities. The crying evil in the sex disproportion. Indeed, Beaumont said that the place reeks of sex. The high murder rate, including uxoricide, wife killing, which was predominant and made the papers, very high rates of wife killing, wife mutilation. As in India, some wives had their noses cut off and some their lips cut out to make them undesirable, hungry, and unable to eat, and slowly die. And also the requirement for an immigrant to have a pass once he was more than 2 miles from his plantation. And throughout the West Indies, they were jailed for periods, sometimes up to 2 weeks and more for that. Indeed, in one case in Trinidad, 2 migrants died in jail because they were found 2 miles beyond the plantation and they were incarcerated. The abominable condition of the Houston Estate Hospital, one of the larger estate hospitals, and this was, of course, exemplary across the hospitals. Beaumont stated that the Houston Estate Hospital was in an abominable condition and had been reported against repeatedly. He had also seen the great number of such sufferers endeavoring to earn their bread or roti when manifestly unfit for such work or exertion, broken by fever, starvation, dropsy, ulcers, some with amputated legs, and requiring continued rest and generous diet to give them even a chance of life. They worked and they died. They were forced to work and died on the estates. But that abuse had its consummation in a class of cases, and he also pointed out to the poor conduct of the medical men in doing what was right according to the Hippocratic oath they had taken. Dead man to hospital. And this is a case again of the simple malice that we understand that occurred during slavery and during indenture. Here, some indentured servants were carrying a man who was dying or dead to the hospital of one of the principal estates in Guyana, where Beaumont believed he was admitted without any objection. But as the manager had not approved this work of charity, not only did the manager lay a charge against the persons who had taken part for this willful trespass, but he had the effrontery upon the charge being dismissed to take it up at a higher level and appeal before the chief magistrate, Beaumont's predecessor. Water. Beaumont also referred to the lack of potable water, drinking water, and that immigrants had to go for miles aback in search of the unwholesome creek water, which is then often hardly to be got, a grievous burden to fetch and carry, and when obtained, barely fit to drink. Water was scarce at the Houston Hospital, as it was at other hospitals, and in the barracks lines and housing of the indentured immigrants in Guyana. My conclusion, quick, short, sweet. Beaumont's first-hand account tells us about the horror and terror inflicted on the Indian immigrants, very much like slavery. Was it despotism tempered by sugar, as Trollope had said? What is your conclusion? I thank you very much. A good day to you.